Thank you, Dr. Sharon. Uh, when I got this book and I started reading it about 20 months back, I read through a few chapters and pages and all that. Suddenly something struck me. This book has been written by a person representing a very, very unique community or a very unique species, if you don't mind that term. Because, let me explain. Usually these kind of books, that is memoirs of service in government, are written usually by people in the government who have been in the government, either political leaders, who are ministers and all, or who are in the civil service, persons like Ambassador Sharon, Ambassador Friedman. So those are the people. So they are the people, or people like me, that is in the media, because we report that. I mean, you make history and we report the history. So that's the kind of understanding I had about this kind of books. So you are on one side of the table and people like me are on the other side of the table. But here is a person who has been sitting on top of the table. He has been there seeing the decision-making process, part of the decision-making process in a way, and also communicating those decisions to people like us. So you have the advantage of seeing both how decisions are being made, how policies are being formulated, and how that is reflected in the public, to the media, because we are the people who communicate it to the public, so to the people. So you had that advantage of sitting on the table and looking like Janus-based kind of existence you had. And I'm very happy that many of your fraternity are here to take part in this discussion today. So I'll first give a few impressions that I had about this book when I was going through. One thing I thought is you have dealt with the economic reforms, you have dealt with the foreign policy, you have dealt with Punjab, you have dealt with virtually everything, and also the scams, and each of the scams and all that. But I thought one thing we miss, or in most of the narrative about Narasimha Rao that we come across today, most of the people miss is how he diffused Mandal education. The Mandal, the upheaval about Mandal that was there, and it began in the 1990, the VPC government's introduction or announcement of the Mandal reforms being implemented. And the country, within a month or so, the country was in total turmoil. We had a very busy time and all that. So then there was the election, and Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister. And the manner in which he handled it, I still remember how first he made it a non-political issue and more of an administrative matter. He handled it administratively. He implemented the Mandal reservation, which is Welfare Minister Sitaram Kesri was the key person who was in charge of the implementation. And along with that was the economic reforms. In fact, we often overlook the role of the economic reforms in diffusing Mandal, because economic reforms, through implementing economic reforms, so Narasimha Rao was getting the middle classes or the forward classes who were agitated about using jobs in the government or not able to be recruited into the government. He was telling the so-called forward caste who were agitated, look, don't bother about the government jobs anymore. There are more riches, more jobs in the liberalized economy. So that message, it was a very strong but understated political message that Narasimha Rao gave through the economic reforms to the agitated forward community or the agitated youth in India. So through that, he diffused, I would say his soul, he diffused a crisis that would have been there in Indian society as well as in the Indian polity. So that is something which I thought, not only you, I mean, most of the narrative about Narasimha Rao government, most of the others, those which you claim not to have read, have also missed that. I thought that is something that had to be flagged, at least in the discussions that we have about those 5 years of the turning point years or the tipping point years of India in the 1990s. Then, of course, as media persons, we are always interested more in scams and how we reported scams and all that, and you have dealt with a few anecdotes also I still remember. One of course is how you rehearse the press conference, the first press conference. I remember once coming to your room, me and my senior Mr. Satchidananda Murthy, both of us came to your room after the press conference one evening. So over coffee you told us how the entire press conference you had rehearsed and how the Prime Minister encouraged all of you to ask, your entire team to ask all the difficult questions that he thought would be coming up, and you had asked those questions and he had folded and you had briefed and all that. So that was actually that's what I said. You are a person who sits on the table and sees both sides of it, both sides of the table. So that insight I still recall very well. But what is more interesting is that you taking the files about the fertilizer scam and taking the entire file, the government file, to a newspaper office and talking to the editor, Mr. Prabhu Chawla, Indian Express, and briefing him completely about the scam and refusing, or somehow or the other you block the publication. I believe that's very interesting, that anecdotes. But it also shows the kind of trust that people in the government had in the media at that time, and also the kind of trust the people like us had in the government, the officers with whom we were also dealing. I don't know, I'm very sad to say that that trust is broken down. That's very sad part of the saga of the Indian media now. Another interesting thing I just wanted to ask you, sir. You mentioned that when after the 1996 elections, when nobody could form a government, of course, then nobody could had a majority, and the Vajpayee, that is the BJP, claimed they had the largest numbers at that time, and President Shankar Daya Sharma invited Vajpayee to form the government, which lasted only 13 days. But at the same time, I remember I was reporting those days from the United Front camp also. I remember Mr. Ramvilas Paswan and Deva Gowda and all were ranting and raving about making even sort of statements against President Shankar Daya Sharma. And you have claimed, and you have mentioned in your book that one journalist had advised Deva Gowda not to make any statements against the president. I believe it was my colleague, Mr. Satchidananda Murthy. Yeah.
I'll come to that later.
Okay. Yes. Those are the things. It tickled my curiosity also at that time. Another interesting thing, which also I mentioned about the trust between the media and the people in the government at that time. It doesn't mean that we were throwing everything aside that the government gave or whatever they were dictating. No, not that way. But we had a trust in the media, in the government, and the government also had that. So similar was, is that the kind of good relations between the government and the opposition. You have recalled one anecdote here, how Advani, who was the leader of the opposition, who saved Narasimha Rao from the Solanki's, in which Madhav Singh Solanki was a foreign minister at that time, External Affairs Minister, who was said to have gone with a letter and asked the Swedish not to go ahead with the investigation. So, in fact, that became a big scandal, but at the same time, you have described how L.T. Advani was the opposition leader who saved the government, or at least gave a face-saving solution to the government. I recall another anecdote, sir, if I may recall it here. I think it was the second budget of Manmohan Singh that was being presented in the evening. That time the budget was presented in the evening. So the second budget was going to be presented whom the finance minister, Mr. Dr. Manmohan Singh, rose to present the budget, make the budget speech when there was a big hangama from the opposition, that is Mr. Somnath Chatterjee, who was the CPIM leader of the CPIM leader. They were objecting, saying that basically certain tax proposals had been shown to the World Bank and had got approval from the World Bank, and there was a And entire, especially the left parties, and also the BJP was also part of that hangama at that time. They were all objecting to that and said that they want an assurance from the finance minister that nothing was shown to anybody. Also, I don't exactly recall it. But, and finally, it went on for 10-15 minutes and we thought the budget was not going to be presented that day. And then Mr. K. Advani, who was the leader of the opposition, stood up and said, okay, if the government can give a solemn assurance in this house that the Raja tax proposals have not been shown to anybody, has not been revealed or shared with any other outside agency, if that solemn assurance can be given in this house, we allow the budget to be presented. And the finance minister immediately, promptly consulted the prime minister and made that assurance, and that was how the second budget of Manmohan Singh, which was actually the reform budget, the so-called reform budget, not the first budget, though many people said it was because of the first budget. It was actually the second budget of Manmohan Singh that began the saga of reforms in this country.
I think you'll have to finish.
Okay, yeah. Then, okay, one or two more points I would say. One point I thought we had to be explained here was how he diffused and not or had the deal with the Chinese. There were two border agreements with the Chinese at that time, the border, the freezing agreement so-called. So, but the impact of that was felt elsewhere also, because I remember, because I was covering defense at that time, the impact was felt elsewhere, because here the armed forces were actually really struggling, because they had a real shortage of especially infantry personnel. So these two border agreements actually froze the borders, and it allowed the armed forces to withdraw. I think 3 or 4 or 5 divisions of the infantry were withdrawn from there, and they were used in that, and they could be redeployed in the valley. So, what I found interesting about it was that the Pakistanis were, China were at that time also, they had friendship was there and all that. So, you are actually dealing with enemy's friend to have a deal with this thing, and you withdraw your troops so that you could use them against your enemy, that is the Pakistan. So it's actually Chanakya Niti or the reverse Chanakya Niti, one can say. So these are some of the things which I found was interesting in this book, and also I wish a few more, in the second edition we will also add a few more of these anecdotes into the book. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Prasanna, for bringing to our attention particularly the link between economic reforms as well as the bundle agitation and how these two, in fact, were linked in a sense.